All right, I think we're live. I hope we're live. Thought we had a slight technical error, slight computing malfunction. I was getting a playback error. Hopefully everything's working for everyone out there in YouTube land on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Hopefully you can see this and hear this, and we can chat a little bit here on the live Panther-Lair Show. Of course, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the YouTube channel. Like this video and subscribe to that YouTube channel so you never miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content. I say this as much as I pimp the website, or as much as I push the website. Hit the subscribe button. You can turn on notifications and get an alert sent to your phone every time we go live, like right now. Every time we post new videos at Panther-Lair at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Our morning Pitt videos Monday through Friday. I think we've had some interesting ones this week so far. Had some fun with some this week so far. I think our video yesterday, where we talked about the new chancellor and talked about a coaching change. I threw a pretty heavy conspiracy theory into that one, and I got some people noticed it. I think our guy Josh Newark noticed it and picked up on it. Maybe most people just brushed it off as ridiculous, but I thought it was pretty funny. I had a good time with that. But anyway, you should be watching those videos every day. Hopefully you've gotten a chance to. Today we talked about Pat Narduzzi maybe kind of sort of naming a number one quarterback, which he probably didn't intend to do and likely will walk back tomorrow. We'll find out. I've talked about Pitt losing a player to the transfer portal, Nate Santos going into the transfer portal 2 days ago. I think he went in Tuesday. He went in yesterday, actually. I believe it was yesterday. And then we talked about the kicking situation. But it's a morning talk show just to cover Pitt topics. It's an all Pitt morning talk show. It's about 20 minutes each day. And we just talk about what's going on in the world of Pitt sports. And if there's nothing going on, we find something to talk about. There's always something to talk about. And whether it's news, something that's happened very recently, or just sort of general topics and thoughts, whatever pops into my head. Because in a lot of ways, I'm probably a lot like you. Just kind of think about Pitt all the time. You probably don't think about Pitt for your job, but I do. But you probably still think about Pitt a lot all the time, and Pitt things, Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting. That's the tagline for the website, but that's really all I do is just sort of write about Pitt and talk about Pitt and think about Pitt. So we always find something to talk about on the morning Pitt right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on your notifications so you never miss any of the videos we post here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And like this video while you're at it, because we always appreciate that. And then go check out Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com. Quick shout out to our guy. I haven't been shouting him out enough. Our guy, Byron Floyd, Pitt long snapper, and his Snapper 49 project. That's the website, Snapper49.com. Byron Floyd using NIL as an opportunity to raise money for Children's Hospital. It's a great charity. It's a great cause. He has been touched by, his life has been impacted by Children's Hospital. A lot of people, I think, probably most people watching this video or listening to this have been impacted by Children's Hospital. So go to Snapper49.com, join Byron's cause. You can just donate directly, or you can buy some of his sweet Snapper 49 gear. And who doesn't want to support the Snapper? And or he's got seasonings there. I'm not kidding, like seasonings, and they're actually pretty good and pretty versatile. I've used them on a bunch of different things: roasted potatoes, meats, veggies, wings. He's got some good seasonings. So go check it out, Snapper49.com. I guess that's an ad because he gave me a shirt. And so, it's a bit of a trade there, but the reality is it's just something you should get behind. Just like we, a couple years ago, everybody got behind Cal Adamitis and Johnny Patrician and Kenny Pickett when they did different efforts and campaigns. Deslin Alexandra last year, raising money for Haiti. These guys are using NIL, sure, for their own benefit, but they're also using it to raise money and to help people, which is a unique kind of application of NIL that I don't think we all saw coming a couple years ago when it first really started. I think I always joke that it was, I think we all expected it just to be everybody would get cars and trucks and bags of cash, but guys are actually using it for good. And not just their own good, but the good of others. And so go check out Byron Floyd's efforts at Snapper49.com and support him. This is one of the things you can do as a Pitt fan is you can get on board with a project like this and an effort and a campaign like this. It's snapper49.com. So go check it out right there. Let's see what we got. We got a lot going on. I mean, there's a lot going on in Pitt sports right now, and there's comments and questions already rolling in. If you want to be, if you want to get in the comments, put your comment or your question in the chat screen over here. And if you want to make sure your comment gets read, your question gets answered, you can be a super chatter. You click the little $sign down there at the bottom. You see it at the bottom of the chat screen. Click that thing and support the podcast, support this live show that we do every week, and we'll make sure we get to your comment and question. We don't always get to everybody's comments and questions, but if you're a super chatter, we will. We'll make sure we get to your comment and your question. And before we jump into the comments and the questions in the chat, and that's the fun part of this show is how we have that back and forth. You have your comments and questions, and it kind of leads the conversation and the discussion. But before we get into that, I was thinking about this just before we started the show because I was working on a recruiting article. I interviewed a recruit who visited Pitt football this week. And, I was kind of getting his quotes together, starting to get the article written. And, I mean, you'll see the article on Panther-Lair.com tomorrow. It doesn't matter who it's about. But the recruit said this, quote, I asked him, so how was your Pitt visit? It says, quote, it was great. Very eye-opening. It was different than what I expected in a positive way. I've heard about Pitt, but I never really got into what Pitt really was. For me to come and see the city and get the experience, it was eye-opening. And I thought that was a big comment. That was a big quote. And, they reminded me of Gabriel Williams, a 4-star linebacker who visited last week. He visited on Saturday. And he had a quote. He said, I was surprised by it. I really was. The coaches kept saying I had to come see it. And then once I saw it, sometimes you don't know what to expect, but then you get there and it beats your expectations. Pitt was definitely like that. I see what people see in Pitt to have them high on the list. And it's quotes like that. And we've been hearing more and more of those quotes from recruits who visit Pitt or have visited Pitt this spring. We heard things that Jeff Capel said, sort of similar, when he talked. And he said this a number of times. He said it this past season when he talked about sort of what the past few years have been like. And he said it in the past as well, that, the COVID situation, the pandemic that created this sort of extended year-long dead period with no in-person visits and no campus visits was really had a negative impact on recruiting for Pitt basketball. I mean, it had a negative impact on recruiting, I think, for everyone. But he said it really negatively impacted Pitt basketball because most people who don't live in Pittsburgh have a concept of what Pittsburgh is, what the city is, and what Pitt's campus by extension is, but they've never actually been there to see it. And almost, I don't want to say to a man, but almost to a person, they come on campus, they come to the city, they see the campus, they experience what it's actually like here, and they're almost all surprised. Most people have a concept of what this place is. And when I say this place, I mean this region. And I mean the city. And I mean, the city of Pittsburgh, what Oakland is, and what the University of Pittsburgh campus is. And they have a concept of it. But then they get here and realize that it's not really what their brain had taught them. It's not really what the montage on Monday Night Football really showed. That it's something different. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it's some glorious place. But I think we all know that it's a little bit nicer than what the common notion of Pittsburgh is. A common notion that was born in like the 1970s or something like that. And while we always, Pittsburgh, I think, is often accused of living in the past, the reality is people's perception of Pittsburgh lives in the past far more than those of us who actually live here live in the past. I think there are great efforts in the city of Pittsburgh to sort of move forward, but that perception still exists of hell with the lid off and the smoky skies and the steel industry and all these things that just they're not part of it. And Jeff Capel has said himself that his notion of what Pittsburgh was and of what Pitt was and what Oakland was and what all these things are, his notion of all these things was different before he actually came here and saw it. And he has said that, he feels like getting people here, getting recruits and their families on campus in the city, has such a significant impact, such a positive impact, where people are almost inevitably impressed. And you're seeing that with the football recruits now too, and it's not new. I mean, guys talk all the time about how blown away they are by that drive, when you come out of the Fort Pitt tunnel and the city unfolds in front of you and all these different things. I mean, that recruits have been talking about that for years. But it seemed there's something about the way it's resonating right now. And when I'm hearing it from recruits over and over again, and when I'm hearing Jeff Capel talk about it, and we're seeing the success that Capel has had with the recruits that he's brought in and the transfers that he's brought in, and they're going to do it again this weekend with the transfer they're bringing in, and hope to, they're hoping to have some, similar success, I think. And we could talk about that for sure. But it's just interesting to see how Pitt, how Oakland, and how the city of Pittsburgh are resonating with recruits and their families right now, and how much of an impact it's having. And I did a morning Pitt. Maybe it was yesterday's morning Pitt, maybe it was Monday's, I forget. But it was really just about momentum, and the momentum that Pitt football has right now. But I mean, you could obviously apply it to basketball as well, coming off an NCAA tournament appearance and 2 NCAA tournament wins and 24 wins total and all the success that they enjoyed. There's a lot of momentum behind these Pitt athletics programs right now, particularly football and men's basketball. And you're seeing it sort of stretch out to the athletic department, Heather Lyke being named athletic director of the year. And certainly, I mean, there's successful programs all over the department. Wrestling at a national champion this year. Volleyball continues to succeed. Both soccer programs are doing well. You're seeing a lot of success. But specifically as it relates to the football and men's basketball programs that we obviously talk a lot about here, there's just a lot of momentum. And, the football program, 10 commitments so far, 6 in the month of March. They're rolling on the recruiting front. I think their perception is at, I don't want to say an all-time high, but it's pretty high. Coming off the win over UCLA in the Sun Bowl, a 5-game winning streak to end the season, a 9-4 season, 20 wins over the course of 2 years, an ACC championship. I can't really even list all the accolades and accomplishments without running out of breath. Sometimes I try to get it all in one breath, and I like to see how much I can say in one breath before I start to black out. And I can't list all the accomplishments of the last 2 years just for the football program without getting close to blacking out, which seems like pretty high praise. But I mean, there's a lot of momentum, the success they've had on the field. And I think what I said on the morning Pitt, and what I would say here is, I think Pitt fans have a mixed reaction to last season. No doubt they're happy with the 5-game winning streak. I mean, this is a team that was 4-4, and they ended up going 9-4. No doubt they're happy with the 5-game winning streak to end the season. They're happy with the Sun Bowl and the win over UCLA and kind of how that game went down and all those things, and 20 wins over 2 years and all that. But it's hard not to it's hard to shake the feeling of missed opportunity when it comes to the Georgia Tech and Louisville games. But I think when you pull back a little bit, when you're not up close and personal with this program, like somebody who covers the team or somebody who's a fan of the team, when you pull back a little bit and you look at sort of the broad accomplishments of the program, it looks like a program on the rise, and it feels like a program with momentum. And I think that's carrying over to recruiting. And you add in what the team seems to be doing right now, how the defense is getting rave reviews, and Phil Dracovic seems to be emerging as a strong candidate to play well, to be a good quarterback for this team. You start ending up with not just momentum built from previous success, which would be the last 2 seasons, and momentum through the recruiting process, which is happening right now, but momentum for the coming season where it looks like they might have a chance to have another really good year and stack 3 really good years on top of each other. There's a lot of momentum right now. Jeff Capel's feeling it too, I think. I think he brought in a really good recruiting class with Bub Carrington and Jalen Lowe and Marlon Barnes. They're working on some transfers who look like they could be a real hit if they join this program, a great fit and guys who can really make an impact. Returning some guys who made a big impact last year, and with a team that has a chance to really rattle off some wins and really have some success again and start stacking its own successful seasons on top of each other. Because, all the success of this athletic department, it's great. It's great. It's great to see the volleyball team going to Final Fours over and over again. It's great to see the progress the soccer programs have made. I mean, wrestling winning a national championship, Nina Barnacorsi winning a national championship. That's awesome. That's incredible, you know? You still need football and men's basketball to be operating at a high level. Because if you have volleyball Final Fours and wrestling national champions and soccer success, but your football team goes 3-9, and your basketball team goes 11-20, or 11-19, or something like that, or 11, I don't think you're going to win Athletic Director of the Year. You win Athletic Director of the Year when you've got the football and men's basketball success, and then you've got a bunch of other successful programs around them. And I don't mean to minimize or diminish or demean the accomplishments of those other programs. I mean, Dan Fisher's the best coach in the city of Pittsburgh right now. There's no question about that, I think. Jay Vidovich and Randy Waldrum and Keith Gavin have done incredible jobs with their programs. There are some programs that are slacking, and there have been a few firings this offseason. But it's all sort of capped and supported by the success of football and men's basketball. I mean, those are the things that are ultimately will put you over the top as an athletic program. And right now, this moment here, this offseason of the spring of 2023 has both of those programs at a pretty high level. As high as they've both been sort of concurrently since 2009, probably. I mean, would you agree by that? When was the last time both programs were kind of rolling as well as these two seem to be? And it would probably be 2009. Now, 2009 men's basketball was riding a wave of longer, more consistent, sustained success. But in terms of both programs doing pretty well at the same time, I mean, I don't think they've both been as high as they are now at the same time since 2009, probably. That would probably be my the date where I would date it back to. 2009 in the spring. Football was coming off a 9-4 season. Basketball was coming off an Elite Eight appearance. In the fall, the football team went on to a 10-win season. I mean, that year was a high watermark. And I'm not saying they're necessarily at that high watermark right now with where they are, with what they've accomplished, but they're as close to it as they've been since then. So there's a lot of momentum for these programs right now. They're operating at a high level. They're having a lot of success, and of course that just creates the pressure to sustain the success and keep it going. We'll see what can happen on that front. I'm gonna check over to the chat screen, see what everybody's doing. Everybody's talking about. Got a lot of comments and questions already filtering in. Remember, you post your comments and questions there in that chat screen. Is there along the right hand side of your screen? You can ask a question, post a comment. RJCman38 is a super chatter, so we'll get to him first. He says, I'm a Pat Narduzzi fan, but his handling of quarterbacks other than Pickett has been torture throughout his tenure. Do you think Narduzzi will ever just develop quarterbacks like Pickett again? I'm so not happy about Dracovic. All right, well, Narduzzi's handling of quarterbacks. Well, let's see. You want to do a quick run through history here of Narduzzi's handling of quarterbacks. So we went into 2015 with Chad Wojtek as the incumbent starter, and Nate Peterman, quite frankly, hadn't beat Wojtek out for the starting job. And so through the first two games, if you recall, the opener against Youngstown State and the Akron game, the game at Akron, they basically rotated quarterbacks. Every couple of drives is what they ended up doing. And by the time they got to halftime of the Akron game, they decided that Peterman was the better option. Not necessarily that he had been very good against Youngstown State, and his stat line against Akron wasn't all that great either. But they decided that Peterman was a better option. They stuck with him for the next two seasons, which included one of the great games in Pitt history with the win at Clemson. Seems like that was handled pretty well. Nate Peterman ended up being a pretty good quarterback for Pitt. And again, led the charge through 5 touchdown passes in one of the top 5 biggest wins in Pitt football history. 2017, you fast forward, they brought in Max Brown as a transfer. He was the starter, started a couple of games. They decided that he was not playing well enough, so Narduzzi benched the quarterback and brought in Ben DiNucci, who was then not playing well enough. So he benched the quarterback and brought in Max Brown, who was playing better before he got hurt and was lost for the season. Kenny Pickett ended up going in later in that game, which burnt his red shirt. And they stuck with Ben DiNucci for a little while, gave Pickett some opportunities here and there, but it took him a while to get up to speed on the offense. And then got to the Virginia Tech game and the penultimate game of the season. If you recall, Ben DiNucci started, played the first quarter. They went to Kenny Pickett in the second quarter, which was the plan going in. And they said, we'll get to halftime and we'll see which one had played better, and we'll go with him. It's been Kenny Pickett ever since. Last year, Kedon Slovis wins the starting job. By all accounts, from everyone I've talked to, he was the better quarterback in practice. And that's what the coaches base their decisions on. For the first half of the season, for the better part of the first half of the season, Nick Patty was hurt. So replacing Kedon Slovis was not even an option in the first half of the season. In the second half of the season, obviously Slovis had a struggling game at Louisville. He wasn't very good, but I mean, there were a lot of issues in the North Carolina game. And then Slovis managed Pitt through 4 wins in November before leaving the team, and Patty took over. So I don't know where the big issue with the handling of the quarterbacks has been. I think that there's a general contention that Narduzzi handed the job to Slovis, and that was it, and there was never anything going to be a change, and that's wrong because you can't just predetermine something like that. I mean, have you guys paid attention to Pat Narduzzi over the last 9 years? Okay, this guy, he will do what it takes to win games. He'll put the best players out there. He has put the best players out there. And almost 100% of the time, if there's a guy not playing, even though, if there's a guy who's perceived to be the best player, but he's not playing, the reality is that he's probably either unreliable in his assignments or doesn't practice well or doesn't do well in film. And I know a lot of people will say, well, I don't care how a guy practices. You just got to put him out there and find out what happens. No. Coaches don't think like that. 95% of the time, coaches do not think like that of, let's just put him out there and see what happens. They're not going to take that kind of risk. They'll take the solid, reliable guy over the guy who might be flashier, but is unreliable in his assignments. The guy who's, he might get an interception, but he also might take the wrong angle and give up a 90-yard run or a 50-yard pass or something like that. They're not going to take that risk. And probably for good reason. I mean, a guy like Paris Ford was to some extent is a poster boy for this, where, people constantly say, they got to get Paris out there. Why aren't they playing Paris? Why aren't they playing Paris? And he made all these amazing, flashy plays. He's one of the most exciting players I've seen in my time covering Pitt. But then I talk to the coaches, they watch the film, and you look, and you're like, wow, he was out of place on that play. He gave up a touchdown there because he didn't do his assignment. Coaches will rarely just throw a guy out there to see what happens. There's never been a coach I've covered who has wanted to lose games, right? Every coach I've covered, and probably almost every coach across America, has always wanted to win games. And in order to do that, they're going to put their best players on the field, or they're going to put the players they perceive to be best on the field, because those are the guys that give them the most confidence about winning games, right? They're not going to play the guys that they believe to be inferior unless they believe that using that guy gives them the best chance to win the games. And so Kedon Slovis playing all season long was because the coaches believed he gave them the best chance to win the games. Phil Dracovic is quarterback number 1. He is. And he appears to be in that position. And if he stays in that position for all 12, 13, 14, however many games this season, it will be because Pat Narduzzi and Frank Cignetti believe he's the best quarterback to lead the team. Gives them the best chance to win games. And I think every decision Narduzzi has made regarding quarterbacks has been based on his belief of who gives them the best chance to win games. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. And, this notion that Narduzzi won't bench a quarterback, I mean, he benched Wojtek, he benched Brown for DiNucci, and then DiNucci for Brown, and then DiNucci for Pickett. So, I mean, he benched like 4 guys in that first year. It feels like Narduzzi never benches a quarterback because for 4 years he had Kenny Pickett and he wasn't going to bench the quarterback. But the reality is, when he has been faced with a situation where I shouldn't say it that way. The reality is he has benched quarterbacks. He doesn't just tie himself to a guy and say, that's it, I'm going with this guy. And even transfers. I mean, you can say, well, yeah, but transfer. He brought in Keaton Slovis as a transfer, and he had to go with him. He brought in Max Brown as a transfer, and he benched him early in the season, like 2 games into the year, 3 games or whatever it was. First month of the year, first month of the season, he benched him. So Narduzzi will make the changes if he feels like he needs to make the changes. If he feels like there's another guy who gives him the best chance to win. I'm not saying he's been perfect in all his decisions. I'm not saying he's been perfect in all his evaluations. I'm not saying he's been perfect in recruiting quarterbacks. But he'll play the guy he believes gives him the best chance to win. So right now, that looks like Phil Dracovic is the guy that Pitt, that Narduzzi, and Frank Signetti believe in. Let's see. Talk is Pitt says, do you know if Pitt has contacted anybody in the transfer portal in football for this year? And do you think we will add another football transfer? Well, yeah. I mean, we know they contacted, what's his name? Jaquay Jackson, a wide receiver from Cal U. We just saw that. He was supposed to visit yesterday. Didn't end up coming in. He's actually been, he's been blowing up out there. Getting tons of offers from all over the place. And, I'm not sure what's going to happen there. So, yeah, they're working the transfer portal. They've got a handful of empty spots already. You would have to think after spring camp, they're going to lose some more guys. And when that happens, I think once I look at it 2 ways, right? I think on one hand, I think they have an idea of the positions where they might need help. I think wide receiver seems like an obvious one where they could probably use another body or two. I think from a numbers standpoint, from a talent standpoint, from an experience standpoint, they could probably use some help at wide receiver. I think you can always use more offensive linemen. I mean, that's, just if nothing else for depth. Linebacker, they're a little bit thin, but I think they've got some really good talent. Those are probably the priority spots. If they were going to go get guys. So I think they get to the end of spring camp. They see if anybody else leaves, if there are any other spots they need to fill in, and they see, and then they act on it maybe a little bit more than, or maybe a little bit more at that point than they are acting on it right now. So, they have guys who are constantly monitoring the transfer portal, guys who are constantly looking at all the players who are in, what positions, who fits what, who could do this, who could do that. When they decide to act, I think they'll be prepared. And so I think they're doing some small things along the way, but they're not, there haven't been big moves just yet. But some of that I think you'll see more of post-spring when Pitt gets a better idea of its own roster. And they also see what new guys go into the portal from other rosters. S-Max says, hi, Chris. Pitt Hoops needs some muscle to back up the 4-5 position. Hopefully the transfer portal can provide that. So I think this is a really interesting concept. I'm really kind of torn on this with the 4 and the 5. Because I look at it right now and I see Federico and Guillermo Diaz-Graham, and I see Blake Hinson and Jorge Diaz-Graham. All right, set aside the conversation of whether Hinson should play the 3 or the 4. There's some interchangeability in those two positions anyway. They're bringing in another guy who could potentially play the 3, and they could go 3 guards, and they have a lot of different options. Let's just talk about those 4 guys for those 2 spots. The Diaz-Graham twins, Federico, and Blake Hinson. I look at that, and I think you could use depth. You could use somebody suggested this on the board, and I think it's a good call. Like another center, a third center, a 5th-year center who could be, a backup in case something happens with Federico or Guillermo Diaz-Graham. Somebody gets hurt or something like that, and you have to go to a third center, so you're not playing Jorge there or Blake or something like that. But on the whole, I think if I'm Jeff Capel, I'm probably rolling with those 4 guys. I think I would be content to roll with those 4 guys. The Diaz-Graham twins and Federico are going to add some strength in the offseason. There's probably a ceiling to how strong they can get. There's probably a limit to... I'm sorry, I got distracted. Somebody just sent me a text with a picture of themselves like watching this podcast. This is very Inception or something like that. I feel like the top is going to stop spinning any moment now. The Diaz-Graham twins and Federico are going to get stronger. There's probably a ceiling to how strong they can get. I mean, you're not going to bulk those guys up to like 285. You know what I mean? They're never going to be built even like an Aaron Gray or something like that. You know, there's some limit, but they have so much length and they have so much athleticism for their size, and they've, you know, the Diaz-Graham twins in particular have a sneaky good handle and shooting that I think, you know, rather than just having guys who can beat up opponents under the basket, you know, you use the strengths that those guys have. And I think you ride with it. I don't know that there's a great need to bring in a banger for the 4 or 5 spot. You know, unless you're legitimately going to move Blake Hints into the 3 full time, then maybe you bring in some big, you know, bulking guy to play the 4 and bang. But I don't. I could be completely off base on this, and they're going to have extra scholarship spots. So, like I said, maybe they could bring in an extra center or something like that to be your third center, your emergency center. But to me, I mean, I'll ride with the Diaz-Graham twins and Federico and Blake Hinson. I think you can win like that. They did win like that, you know, and they won like that with the Diaz-Graham twins being freshmen and Federico playing his first year, and Blake Hinson his first, you know, time playing basketball in 2 years and his first year here at Pitt. A year from now, or 6 months from now, all 4 of those guys are going to be, I think, are going to be much better than they were this past season, particularly the Diaz-Graham twins and Federico. I can't wait to see what those guys do, you know, after they go through a full off season on top of everything they've learned and experienced this past season. I think they're going to take a big step forward. They may not be that much stronger. They'll be a little stronger. I think they'll be able to control the ball a little bit more. I think they'll be more confident, more aggressive in how they go up to the hoop. And I think they'll be able to finish a little bit better. But they've got natural skills that, you know, don't get too caught up in the lack of strength and end up missing the things that those guys do really well. I think with their length, they can have a huge impact on defense, and they did. Federico was great with blocking shots, and I think Guillermo Diaz-Graham can get there as well. End up being a pretty good shot blocker because of his length. I think they all 3 can improve as rebounders, and again, using their length even to make up for what they might lack in a little bit in strength. But I'd go with those guys, you know, and again, maybe bring in somebody to be a backup center behind Federico and Guillermo Diaz-Graham. I think it might be tough. I mean, I could be completely wrong about this. I mean, you got to be a salesman if you're a coach, and so this is, you know, what Jeff Capel gets paid to do. But it might be tough to convince a big 4 or a big 5 to come in when you look and say, well, Coach, you've got everybody who played all the minutes at those 2 positions back. You know, other than John Hughley, you've got everybody who played. You know, I guess in Nate Santos. You've got everybody who played minutes at those 2 positions coming back. Your top 4 guys at the 4 and the 5, none of them left. They're all here. So where am I going to play? You might need like some big center from Harvard or someplace who could come in and give you 2.3 minutes per game or something like that. You know, except for that one game where he plays 11 or 12 minutes because, you know, Guillermo and Federico get into foul trouble or something like that, or somebody gets hurt. That might be, you know, that might be your best bet. But I mean, I could be completely off base about this. You know what I mean? They could end up bringing in some guy who's 6'9", 265 next week when they're, you know, for the visit period next weekend or something. I don't know, but it just seems to me like you could go with those 4 and, you know, I don't know, be at the top of the ACC, win a couple games in the NCAA tournament, go for 20-plus wins, get ranked. I mean, I think you can do that with those 4, but that's just me. Let's see. RJCman38 on the quarterback topic says the point is Pat Narduzzi needs to develop quarterbacks, not just rely on retreads. Nate Yarnell would like to see him get the nod. You know, The transfer thing, I mean, I think you have to accept that it's part of college football right now. And if you're in a position where you don't have a quarterback who's developed over 3 or 4 years and he's ready to step into the starting job, there are a lot of good options out on the transfer market. A lot of good quarterbacks with experience that you can bring in. Guys like Phil Dracovic or Keaton Slovis or Christian Veer, or, you can run down the list and you can look around college football and find lots of teams that have had lots of success with transfer quarterbacks. I mean, that is, and we said this a couple of years ago, the transfer portal has, I mean, it's become a resource for a lot of things, but it's become a source of, put it another way, it's become a primary source of quarterbacks. You know, I mean, it is a significant factor in quarterback recruiting. You don't just recruit high school quarterbacks anymore. And I know you could say this about every position, but I think at the quarterback position in particular, because I think quarterbacks are probably, and I feel like I even read a study on this, that, percentage-wise, more quarterbacks transfer than maybe any other position, because those guys, after a year or two, they know what their path is. They know if they're going to have a shot at the starting job or not, if they have a realistic chance in the next year to get the starting job. And so a guy like Christian Veer says, I'm not playing here at Penn State. It's going to take an injury or something weird or the guy ahead of me transferring for me to get a shot. I got to go somewhere I'm going to get a shot. And so guy ends up transferring. Guy, trying to find a new spot. And that happens all over college football, and you see it. You see teams that are succeeding with transfer quarterbacks. You don't want to make a living on it. Like, you don't want to make it your only source of quarterbacks, because that would get a little bit tiring if every year or every 2 years you're going back to the transfer portal for that year's starter. You'd like to be able to develop Nate Yarnell or Ty Diefenbach or whoever it is. Or, best case scenario, you could go get a Christian Veer, who's like a redshirt freshman, redshirt sophomore, guy who's been in college for a couple of years. He's physically developed. He's been around the game, maybe even gone on the field for a little bit like Veer did, and has an idea of what it takes to compete and excel and succeed in college football. That would be ideal. And you bring that guy in, you've got him for 3 or 4 years. I mean, that would be great if you could do that all the time. You don't have to worry about how a guy's going to adapt to the college environment, like when you're recruiting high school kids. You don't have to worry about how he's going to, handle being a college quarterback, because that's a big problem with high school quarterbacks. You don't know how, can they run the huddle? Can they get the plays in? Can they set the protections and do all the different things you have to do in a huddle? Can they watch film? Can they understand the defenses? Can they understand the offensive systems and all these things? Well, if you got a guy like Veer who's spent a couple years at Penn State, he's been in the Big Ten, he's played games at a Power 5 level. Well, you can check a few of those boxes that you can't check with Ty Diefenbach, you know what I mean? Or any freshman quarterback that you're bringing in, where you just don't know. Even if it's Arch Manning, you don't know really how he's going to adjust to being a college student athlete. Well, you kind of know it there because he is one. He's already been one. It's not the worst way to go. And if you're a program like Pitt that's not going to get that 5-star guy, this isn't the worst path to follow to, keep recruiting high school kids and look for those guys who are freshmen, redshirt freshmen, sophomore, somewhere around that eligibility in the transfer portal. And you know what? And I said, a program like Pitt that's not going to get the 5-star kids. Reality is a lot of those 5-star kids are ending up transferring anyway, because they get there and they find out they're not going to be the starter as a freshman or a sophomore, and so they go. Well, this is where, this is where a school like Pitt can roll up and be like, come play with us. And then you end up with some good players. And so it's not, you don't want to make any one of these sources your only source of quarterbacks. You want to, you probably want to find a balance of high school guys and transfer guys. But you can't completely ignore either one of them either. You need, I think you need a little bit of both, just because that's, because it's the best way to say it, because the portal is there and it exists as a resource that you can either ignore or use, capitalize on and take advantage of. And I think the smart programs, the ones that are doing it well, are capitalizing on it and taking advantage of it. And I think Pitt has done a good job of that, and I think they'll continue to maximize it as much as they can. We got to talk about. I got to tell you about Chris Gates real quick before we get back into the comments and questions. You know our guy Chris Gates, the Wednesday Night Live show. It's sponsored as always by Chris Gates Fitness. Chris is an online fitness coach from Pittsburgh. He works with people all over the world to create customized fitness and nutrition programs that work. You know Chris, he's a huge Pitt fan, and he also loves supporting the Wednesday Live show every week. Now, if you're not already, make sure you're following Chris on social media. All right, I follow him all over the place, and it's great. There's great information, little video clips, and just wise advice when it comes to lifestyle, health, nutrition, fitness, wherever you spend your time, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, even TikTok. I don't know if my man Chris is out there doing dances because I'm not on TikTok, but he's on TikTok. Search for Chris Gates Fitness. Chris Gates, Gates Fitness, and you'll find him there. He posts info and tips every single day that can help you with your workouts, your diet, and more. Search Chris Gates Fitness on any social media platform or go to Chris's website, chrisgatesfitness.com, to find more information. So thanks, Chris, for supporting the podcast, and make sure you go check him out because Chris does a great job. It's a lot of fun to follow his information and learn from it. I get good tips from it all the time. All right, let's see here. Brock McDonagh says, hey, Chris, I asked this question on the board yesterday, but it seems like Jaquay Jackson didn't make it down to Pitt yesterday. Where does Pitt stand with Jackson, and does he still plan to visit? So, yeah, Jaquay Jackson is the wide receiver from Cal U. I think he's from Sarah Catholic originally, I think. Went into the transfer portal and has really blown up. He's got offers from all over the place. I think every Power 5 conference, definitely the ACC, the Big 12, the SEC, I think, is involved. He was planning to visit Pitt yesterday. That visit didn't happen. I think Pitt is still hoping to get him on campus for a visit. We'll see. Like I say, his interest level has gone through the roof. He's a guy. It's pretty interesting. I mean, I don't like this wasn't a situation where the guy coming out of high school, I think he was, most coaches considered him a Power 5 player, but he had grade issues or something like that. This was a guy who wasn't a Power 5 level player coming out of high school. It's why he ends up at Cal U. But he grew and he developed, and he became really, really good. And now there are a lot of schools that believe he can play at this level. Pitt is one of them. They'd like to get him on campus. I think they're going to keep trying to get him on campus. We'll see if it ends up coming to pass, but he's blowing up. So I don't know if he's going to end up visiting. He initially planned to visit yesterday, changed those plans. We'll see if I don't know if he's going to show up tomorrow or next week when they have practices in the South Side, but he didn't make it yesterday, and he might, he's turning into quite a heated recruiting battle. Let's see here. CD says, hey, Chris, how is the O-line coming along? Will Pitt look for any transfers at that position? Let's see. Well, how is the O-line coming along? Let's start with that before we talk about the transfers. I think Pitt's O-line is going to be fine. It's really funny. Like we last year, it would have been not this past December, but the December before. So like December 21, right after the ACC championship game. After the ACC championship game, maybe it was January 22, when Owen Drexel and Gabe Hoy and Marcus Minor and Carter Warren all announced that they were going to come back and play one more season, play their super senior year, their 6th year of college. They were going to come back and play in 2022. And it was widely celebrated, as understandably so. It's great to have returning starters in the offensive line. That's what you want to have. That's a good thing. You want to have that kind of experience on the offensive line. You want to have guys who have played, and to have all those guys back meant that's great. They don't have to break in a bunch of new starters this year. But there was sort of a flip side to that. And the flip side was, it just means you're kicking the can down the road one more year. And now in 2023, you're going to have to break in a bunch of new starters instead of 2022. There was always a feeling that moment was coming when you were going to have to make a big transition. You were going to have to just kind of rip the Band-Aid off and go with a bunch of guys who haven't played much before and hope they can figure it out along the way. But what happened, It didn't exactly go that way. Because in 2022, all those guys who came back, Gabe Hoy and Carter Warren and Marcus Minor and Owen Drexel and Jake Cradle, the other starter, who still had his 5th year of eligibility last year, and he's ultimately coming back for a 6th year this year. But all 5 of those guys, those 5 returning starters from the ACC championship game, played 0 snaps together in 2022 as a group, collectively, all 5 of them. They did not play at all together due to injuries. Gabe Hoy was slow to get started at the beginning of the season, didn't play, I think, in the first few games, and then Owen Drexel got hurt, and then Carter Warren got hurt. By the end of the season, you didn't have Warren, and you didn't have Drexel, and I don't even think Gabe Hoy finished the season, because you have Branson Taylor and Matt Gonsalves at tackle, and you had Jake Cradle at center, and you had Marcus Minor and Blake Zabovic at guard. And now, all of a sudden, instead of this team, instead of entering 2023 thinking, oh, geez, they're going to have to just rip the Band-Aid off at O-line, start a bunch of new guys, and just hope it doesn't suck too bad. Instead of that, they've got all guys who have played a bunch coming in. They've got all guys who were starters at some point last season. Cradle started games. Cradle started the whole season. Gonsalves started the whole season. Zabovic started games. Branson Taylor started games. Ryan Baer got a handful of snaps. Ryan Jacoby played a bunch. I think he played in every game last season. He didn't really play much on the offensive line, but he was playing tight end, but he was on the field. He was getting snaps, and he was getting reps. And so somehow you kind of went from thinking there was going to be like 2022 and then 2023, this big drop off. Now it shouldn't really be that much of a drop off. And I think some of the positions you have a chance to actually upgrade. And it's funny to think about, because it's not what if you had asked anyone a year ago at this time what the expectation was for Pitt's offensive line in 2023, I think we all would have said, it's not going to be good. But now I think they have a chance to be really, really good. I think Cradle is a perfectly good center. I think Blake Zabovic's a good right guard. I think Matt Gonsalves on the right tackle is good. And then on the left side, I think Ryan Jacoby will be your starting left guard. And then, Branson Taylor is battling with Ryan Baer. I think Ryan Baer is going to be tough to keep off the field. Terrence Moore is being trained at a couple different positions. He's worked at center. He's learning some tackle now. BJ Williams, the freshman who came in, I think is getting he got some praise from Pat Narduzzi yesterday, so he's been doing well. I think even guys, Terrence Enos and Jason Collier have impressed. I think they still need to find somebody to kind of fill that right tackle position. Maybe that could be Terrence Moore if BJ Williams really pushes himself up to be the backup center. Maybe Terrence Moore could be one of those backup tackles. I think Ryan Baer is probably your first offensive lineman off the bench at almost any spot other than center. But I think you've almost got a legit 2-deep, and you've got a 2-deep, and almost all those guys have played before. So it's a pretty strong situation. Will they try to get a transfer? I think it's one of those things where they'll be aware of what's out there. I don't know if it'll be a priority. I don't know if anybody will walk into the table or walk into the room and bang on the table and say, we need a new guard or we need another tackle or something. Like Pat Narduzzi said that Ryan Manilak has been telling him he needs more linebackers. He needs more linebackers. I don't think Dave Borbley is saying I need more offensive linemen. I'm sure he would like more. They always want more. They always want better. You can always upgrade. But I think he's pretty happy. I think they are pretty happy with what they have on the offensive line coming back for this season. The returning starters plus the guys like Baer who are impressing this spring. So I think Pitt should be in a strong position with the offensive line. And I don't really think a transfer will be a priority unless there's a guy who is content to come in and be depth. You always, if you can find a great player who wants to transfer, you take them. But I don't know if they're necessarily in a position to really need an offensive line transfer this offseason. Got more comments and questions here. I have one other thing I want to tell you about before we get to this. This is awesome, actually. Draft 412 is a new outlet that's coming together to kind of cover all things draft related in Western Pennsylvania in this area. And whether that means like pro prospects from the local colleges or pro prospects that local teams could be looking at. I'm really excited about what it's going to become. And they're hosting an event on the first night of the draft this year at Stage AE, alongside the Jerome Bettis The Bus Stops Here Foundation. So it's the first night of the draft. Travis Marzina from 105.9 The X and Merrill Hodge, ex-Steeler great Merrill Hodge, is going to provide live commentary as the picks are made. It's basically a draft night party where you're going to get together at Stage AE and watch the first round of the draft with a bunch of other people, have food, have drinks, talk about the draft, talk about the picks, get analysis live on the spot. Part of the proceeds are going to benefit the Jerome Bettis Bus Stops Here Foundation. There's already a lot of sponsors lined up: iHeartRadio, Caliente Pizza, Fanatics, Bet Rivers, Permanis, Condado Tacos, Burgatory, Shorties, Three Rivers Karting, Eaton Park, a lot more. I'm going to be there to offer insight and some analysis on Pitt guys. Obviously, Kalijah Cansey is the big one, who's a possibility to go that first night. So I'm going to be there to talk about that. But also, I mean, in between picks, we'll have a lot of time to kill. So we'll talk about Pitt's other pro prospects and guys who might get hear their names called over a few days. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's open to the public. So first night of the draft 412 is hosting a draft party at Stage AE with the Jerome Bettis The Bus Stops Here Foundation. So mark that on your calendar. I'm going to tell you about that each week because I think it's going to be a really fun event. I'm excited about it. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a party, so it'll be. I think we'll have a lot of fun. All right, more comments and questions here before we wrap up the show. Let's see. TJ DiStefano says, where would Pitt Hoops be if Jamie Dixon wasn't run out of town? School wasn't happy with 20 wins and making the tournament every year. They will never win a national title. Glad to see Hoops back. TJ, I mean, I lamented it for the longest time. Certainly after they hired Kevin Stallings, certainly after we saw what that era brought. But if you think back to that last season, Dixon's last season, the 15-16? And, think back to that Wisconsin game, the NCAA tournament. What was the final score, like 29-27 or something like that? I feel like even at the end of that game, there was just a general feeling of, you know what? I think it's time to move on here. I think it's time to go in a different direction. Because this dude doesn't seem like he's very happy here. He doesn't seem like he's been happy since they joined the ACC. He doesn't have some of his people here. I mean, Jamie Dixon was really tight with Steve Peterson. Whatever you want to say about Steve Peterson, he had a strong relationship with Jamie Dixon. Peterson was gone. They weren't in the Big East anymore. It wasn't Jamie Dixon's Pitt anymore. And I think you could feel that. And I think you could feel it around the program. You could feel it from Dixon. And it just felt like it was time to go. Now, maybe that was just in the heat of the moment. Maybe that was just at the time. Maybe somebody needed to take a look at the bigger picture. Maybe someone needed to have more vision and say, no, this guy has done a great job building this program. Yeah, if you want to say Ben Howland built the program, Jamie Dixon has sustained it for the better part of 15 years or whatever it was at that point. And, yes, things are not great right now, but we need to support him, give him all the resources he needs, and try to do everything we can as a university and as athletic department to help him succeed. Maybe that needed to happen. Maybe that approach needed to be taken. Maybe Scott Barnes was all too willing to part ways with Jamie Dixon. I mean, clearly he was, right? They waived the buyout or cut the buyout or whatever it was. At the time, it felt like it was time for a change. You know what? At the end of the 2010 season, it felt like it was time for a change with Dave Wanstead. I mean, I'll admit that as much as anyone else will. I said for a long time that I would never, that I couldn't fault Pitt for making the move at that point. If you remember what the vibe was like by the end of the 2010 football season, I think it was similar at the end of Jamie Dixon's final year at Pitt. There was just a feeling of, yeah, it's time to change. It's time to move on. It's time to try something different. It's time for a change. Now, in retrospect, was that the right decision? Certainly our perception on that, I think your perspective on that and your opinion on that is going to be affected by what came after. You know what I mean? It's going to be affected by how they handled the change and how they, of moving from Dixon to what came next. A lot of, similar to how we talk about the post Dave Wanstead era of what came next, of the Mike Haywood debacle and the Todd Graham debacle. That it took a couple years to get around to Paul Chryst, who won 6 games for 3 years in a row before he left. But you do look at those things sort of independent. The decision to move on, and then how you handled it when you did move on. I think the decision in both cases, I get it. I understand. I can't entirely fault them. Now, the way it was handled after that decision was made clearly left a lot to be desired. And so much so that you look back and say, yeah, probably should have just held on to him. Where would the program have gone if Jamie Dixon was still at Pitt? I think it would have depended on the support that he got. It would have depended on the support from the athletic director, the support from the university. If the resources were there, if the resources were behind the men's basketball program, I think Jamie Dixon could have continued to be competitive. Where would he ultimately have gotten? Would he have gotten to a Final Four? Would he have gotten to a national championship? I don't know. Probably not, just because the odds are against it, generally speaking. But, I think with the right amount of support and resources, he could have continued to have a lot of sustained success that everyone would complain about when all he did was win 20 games every year and make the Sweet 16 a bunch. Although he hadn't done that in a long time. But that's neither here nor there. That's a hypothetical that, doesn't ultimately matter. Let's see. Adam Vinchik says, chance of Pitt landing Girard. Joe Girard is one of the more interesting guys that we've seen Pitt linked to, and not just linked to in terms of contact. I mean, Pitt is making a legitimate run at Joe Girard, the Syracuse guard, trying to land him. And I think it's pretty interesting to see them going after a guard from the ACC and a guy that they've played, twice a year ever since he got to college. I mean, it certainly would certainly create some interesting situations if he were to transfer to Pitt, end up playing, in the Dome. I mean, kind of like, John Hughley sort of flirting with Georgia Tech. If he were to go to Georgia Tech and play Pitt twice a year, if the schedule ended up that way, I mean, that would be pretty fun to watch. And certainly I'm sure the Syracuse fans would have a lot of comments for Joe Girard. It seems like things are going well with Girard. It seems like Pitt has done well with Girard by everything I've been able to gather. He would certainly be, I think they need to add a shooter, as much shooting as they can, and Girard would certainly help with that. There's no question about it. I'm not sure if he'd be the point guard that they need, but certainly he can shoot. And I think they need shooters to help fill out this roster. Once again, like they got last year, I think they need to add shooting. That's an important component, I think, to carrying over the success they had from a year ago. So we'll see. We'll see how that pans out. They got visits this coming weekend, and then it's a dead period, and then there's visits next weekend. I would think I don't think Girard is going to visit this weekend. I would think he would visit next weekend. So we'll watch what happens over the next week and a half or so. See what kind of comes together. But all right, we're right up to about an hour here. It's been a lot of fun tonight, as always. While you're here, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Appreciate everybody who joined the live stream tonight, posted the comments and questions. It's always fun to have that back and forth little conversation here on a Wednesday night about Pitt sports. Make sure you stay tuned to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, to get as all of our exclusive Pitt video content. You want to make sure you do that. And, of course, go check out Panther-Lair.com for the latest on Pitt football, basketball, and recruiting. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. All right, we are going to hang it up for tonight. Thanks for everybody tuning in this evening, and we will see you tomorrow morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.